Hi, I'm Miguel Unsueta, and I'm going to talk a little bit about a key skill in management, that being organization and the allocation of resources. So again, recall we've been using the POCS model to get our head around what managers are supposed to do. The next component is organizing. The first critical step in organizing people in an organization is assigning roles. So why do you need to assign roles in an organization? Well, it's critical for the sake of efficiency, productivity, and also morale. There's nothing more anxiety provoking to an employee than not knowing what their purpose is at work. Right? So if people know what their role is in the organization, what exactly they're responsible for, this can create an environment where people actually show up and want to do their job because they know exactly what it happens to be. How you go about assigning roles? Well, it's important to clarify whatever task needs to get done to employees. It's also really important to ensure the employee gives you buy-in in terms of whether or not they can do the things you want them to do, right? So when you describe a role to a person, you need to ensure that that's the kind of job they actually want to do. It's not enough to simply impose a role on somebody. They have to be committed to actually playing out that role in order for work to get done. We'll talk about this a little bit later in this lecture, but it's also incredibly important to agree in a reporting protocol such that you know who is supposed to talk to whom and in what order to ensure that you can keep track of progress in the implementation of objectives. It's also really important to delegate responsibility and delegate jobs in an organization. The value of this is that it creates a culture of mutual trust between employees and managers. It also builds results. It explains to people why they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. It describes what the desirable end state is to people, right? You know exactly what it is you're trying to work towards. And it also emphasizes accountability, right? If I trust you enough as an employee to delegate some responsibilities onto you, this means that I value the skills that you have, the education that you have, and that this will emphasize accountability between all of us. I depend on you in much the same way you depend on me being the manager in this example. Now, one great way to not only identify critical stakeholders in trying to create results oriented towards an objective is the creation of what is known as a RACI chart. Now, what a RACI chart does is it allows people to figure out who is responsible, who is accountable, who needs to be consulted, and who needs to be informed whenever a task is trying to get done in an organization. So now in this example, Tomas here would be responsible for a particular task, meaning that if a task doesn't get done, we know exactly who we can go talk to figure out what happened. Tomas, of course, being a manager, can delegate what needs to get done to accomplish this task, in this case to Jing. So Tomas is responsible, but Jing is the one that is actually doing the work to try to accomplish this task. In this first example as well, Philip would be consulted, meaning that he may have some expertise that are particularly relevant to the implementation of this task. So he's been spoken to, consulted, he's given his advice in order to help this task get accomplished. And then finally, Kim would be informed, right? If this task is somehow going to impact Kim down the line, it's important that she knows what's going on. And you can see how you can break down an objective into a variety of tasks and assign responsibility to different people for these different tasks. You can also start assigning accountability for these tasks to other people as well. The other thing to notice, every row has an R and an A, but not every row has a C and an I, meaning that for every single task, you don't actually need to consult or inform people if the task is relatively straightforward or perhaps detached from any other task happening in the organization. To really get our heads around how these RACI charts can be useful, let's take a more specific example. So let's imagine a manager of a small dentist office wants to add an online appointment system. The dentist, who in this case would be the leader, thinks it's a great idea and approves the hiring of 3 temporary contract workers to actually implement these tools. Now, to get this tool established at the dentist practice, it's important to break down this idea into specific tasks. So the first task is to figure out what competitors are doing and create a plan for trying to either implement something similar or something better than what everybody else already is doing when it comes to online appointments. So in this case, the manager would be responsible for figuring this out. The manager does have hired temporary help. So what the manager can do is delegate this particular task to temporary worker number 2. Of course, temporary worker number 2 can consult with his teammates, that being 1 and 2, and the dentist, of course, would be informed as to what's going on. And then you break down the implementation of this online system into more specific tasks, and with each task, you assign responsibilities and accountability, consulting, and informing as well. So you can see how we would move on from analyzing competitor sites to designing flow with graphics to actually programming the functions of the organization. So the nice thing about this RACI chart is that it breaks down this lofty objective, which is let's get an online appointment system, into very specific tasks. Moreover, it assigns responsibility for these tasks to different players in the organization. And then it makes people accountable in the organization as well. And like I said a little bit earlier, it's also really important to use these kinds of charts because it might help you realize that there are people in the organization that should know what's going on that perhaps you weren't thinking about. So it actually helps you identify who the stakeholders are in trying to create this kind of change or implementation of these sorts of tasks. Delegation, it's great for creating mutual trust between management and employees, but it's important not to delegate absolutely everything. So if you don't know exactly what the task is, you don't want to delegate that. The problem with delegating things you don't fully understand is that you don't know when the task has actually been accomplished. So you need to make sure that you know exactly what the task entails and what a finished product would look like before you actually delegate to anybody else. If the task involves sensitive or confidential information, well, obviously that can have ripple effects in the organization, and you don't want people that you don't trust or who frankly shouldn't know certain things to have access to that kind of information. So in this case, you don't want to delegate this kind of task. If the task is what your job is, right? If the task is your core responsibilities, you also don't want to delegate that as well, right? The idea there being is that you were hired to do a particular job, particular role in the organization, and you can't delegate the core aspects of your job onto other people. And then finally, it's really important not to get in the habit of delegating the things that you don't want to do to people in the organization. Delegation should be a way to try to help people develop and to feel like they are respected and valued in the organization. So you should ensure that not just things you don't want to do or quote unquote dirty jobs get delegated. You want to ensure that desirable tasks as well get delegated to people in the organization. This keeps people motivated at work, and it also allows people to develop through doing activities that are actually perhaps enjoyable and worthwhile. It's important to keep in mind that you're trying to challenge people, but you're not trying to overwhelm them. Like I said earlier, there's nothing more demotivating than setting up objectives or goals that simply cannot be accomplished. So you want to ensure that your objectives, your tasks are challenging, but also achievable. You also want to make sure to communicate to people that you have confidence that the job is going to get done and get done well. This is important so that people feel empowered to do what they've been asked to do, and that you believe that they have the competencies necessary to actually accomplish what you've asked them to accomplish. And then finally, when delegating, you want to ensure that you delegate equally, right? You don't want to start delegating only to a small group of people. This runs the risk of, frankly, ignoring people and also allowing only some to develop and others never to develop. So you want to ensure that your delegation tendencies are equal, in that everybody in your team, your group, your organization, your department, whatever it happens to be, such that everybody gets a chance to actually do some of these tasks that you are delegating to others. To summarize, to organize the implementation of a plan, it's important to assign roles and delegate responsibilities. A RACI chart can be a very useful tool in figuring out what the roles are supposed to be and also what responsibilities need to be assigned to ensure the implementation of these plans. And finally, it's important to delegate with care, delegate equally to people around you, and to follow best practices to ensure good results.